Cool.
Let's wing it.
Wing it. That's why we're here.
Did you capture that one, Cam? That was a good one. Let's wing it.
Let's just go for it.
Been recording for like 8 minutes, so I've got lots of
We're already halfway done the podcast.
lots of
Cam?
nonsense.
I've
I've got Mike dragging a tree into frame on B-roll now.
Wing It Podcast, goosedigital.com, episode 54.
58.
58. Who do we have?
Robin Kroll.
Chris O'Neill.
I'm Butler.
Michael Turksani. All right, 58. Wow, already at 58. That's amazing.
Wow.
Always get that number wrong. All right, we're talking content. We're not going to label this content as king because that would just be annoying for
Dad,
everybody.
it's been done.
It's been done. But content and content strategy and how does it fit into your programs? How does it fit into an overall automation strategy and digital activation strategy is something that we want to talk about because we don't talk about content a ton on this show, right? Our audience they don't like content, or I don't know if they've ever told us they don't like content.
They've
but
been waiting for this, Mike. They've been waiting for us to
finally
sort of
we
bring this
adjust
up to
58 episodes in and we're finally talking about content as a digital agency. Okay.
But it's hard, and the approach has to be really thoughtful, and there's all sorts of details and complexities that hopefully we can really knock down today and talk through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and content's one of those things that everybody just needs, and they have such a problem or a struggle getting it all done, right? I mean, how many people do you talk to, Chris, and they said like, "Oh, we need help. We don't."
Well, they don't. Yeah, like I wouldn't say everybody, but I would say a solid sort of 80%. So we play a lot in those that are just sort of getting started on a marketing automation strategy, and frankly, they don't have what they want. Number one, they don't know what they want, and they need some help to kind of help to put those pieces together. So, obviously not just what it is that they need to produce. They need somebody to produce it, and then it needs to somehow fit into their engagement strategy. So there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, but that usually starts off with, do you guys do content? That's how it starts. Yeah.
Sure.
So yes, the answer is yes, by the way.
Yeah, the answer is yes. So I think from the start that ability to create the content, maybe before we get there, is really just talking about, I think, what did we call it? Not so much content strategy. We're going to get to strategy, but almost like the approach that you would take. So maybe I'll kick this off and then throw the ball over to somebody. But obviously every business has a reason for being. There's a value proposition of a product or a service that they offer, some hopefully unique differentiator, something that they think that they can do better than the next, company that might offer that product. So when you think of those brand tenants or those product, differentiators or those pieces of messaging, really when we want to get into a content discussion, it's about making sure all those things align, especially in a program that is likely going to be not just one thing like a TV commercial, and that's the be all end all, where you're probably looking at components of your website, components of email copy, potentially banner ads that exist, some other piece of material that they might, at the end of the day, download as part of your lead generation strategy or whatever the purpose is for doing it all. It all needs to add together, right? That's pretty difficult. So, and I think a lot of that gets lost along the way. So why don't we maybe start there? It's just like, how do we approach that when we're even getting started on content? So we don't just come out with something that's like totally out of left field and doesn't map back to what we're trying to achieve as a business.
Maybe I can take that to start off with. The word that I always think of is continuity, and just making sure, does the ad one reflect what the business, the product, the service is all about? One, and then two, it's the subsequent follow-ups to create a level of continuity through the messaging, whether it's the auto email response, the landing page itself, even the document, does it actually, whatever the asset might be, a PDF, a video, whatever, does it support what the advertisement really said in the first place? And so even just those considerations alone are meaningful in sort of starting to help establish the brand, reinforce the value prop, and ultimately hopefully align with a need that the prospect or lead has.
Yeah, I think that that concept of aligning with the prospect or the lead, it's making that connection between the brand value, product, service, and to a need that you're trying to meet. So what is the audience looking for? What is, what are the pain points? What are the challenges? And understanding in a way to communicate, using that content to be able to communicate in a language that's really going to resonate. And that's the other thing I think that's tricky about content. It's the way a brand speaks and where a way an audience listens, and needing to find the connection between those two.
Yeah, so the audience and where the audience is kind of like a big determination of that, because before the days of the internet and email and so forth, it was like the way that you spoke to people was like through the TV or through the radio, and it was like you were speaking specifically that message. You had a call to action, call this number or whatever. Well, now your audience they're online, they're on the channels, they're on Instagram, they're on LinkedIn, they're on Facebook, they're basically YouTube. They're consuming that. That's where they're consuming the content. So having your message sort of distributed across the right channel, and then making sure that the message is hitting the portions of your audience the right way. Again, as Mike said, it's not easy, and there oftentimes is a lot more content that is required. So like right now, there's a total, there's a void. There's like this need for small and medium and even large businesses needing to have more content than that they have, that is driving a whole, almost a new industry in sort of creating that content and making it available.
Yeah, I mean, I really like what you said there, Robin, around the brand voice and how the audience listens. And Chris, I thought you were going to go as far as to say in B2B sales that really it ended up being the sales rep or the representative of the company that would then kind of make that translation of what it is that the product or service can do for them. Right now in a digital world, you're doing all of that. So I think there's a couple of things in there that we should explore. But just maybe taking a step back to that brand and audience piece, it's so interesting and Kev, maybe you could weigh in a bit here, because I know you're kind of right in the throes of a lot of content work. And it's challenging for maybe a B2B organization that's going after multi-vertical to adjust their messaging in a way that's, I guess, like you said, Robin, that in a way that they're going to listen to it. So, if you're going after 5 different verticals and now you're saying, well, how do I speak to like healthcare professionals versus, education workers or whatever the case may be, it's a huge challenge.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I try to, in my head, think about it. There's a really high level value prop and voice that you want as your brand. And then from there, there's different sort of layers or levels or tiers or groups of how you position that initial value prop relative to a specific vertical, let's say, or a type of audience, however you split it up. It should all sort of point back up to that initial or high level value prop, and maybe just it's a little more tailored or whatever. So I guess that's the way to look at it, and that's part of the way you build consistency. The other sort of thought I had, Mike, as you were talking there, is it's interesting as when we step in as consultants and we say, okay, well, how do we approach writing content for this business? Because naturally the business themselves will know more about their industry than we will, at least to start. Mm-hmm. And I find for as much as you might assume you're at a disadvantage, you're like, oh gosh, I don't know much about this organization, their industry, it's technical, it's complex. Sometimes that's a good thing too. in that you're not so bogged down in the weeds and you're focused on saying these particular words that are meaningful in this industry, and you can get to the root of the value a bit quicker. And then there's a meeting of the minds with yourself as the outsider who doesn't know as much, but who's really just trying to drive a business case or the value props, whatever they may be, with the expert internally who says it's got to have a bit of this, and that's how you kind of help round it into something that's really usable and hopefully resonates with the audience. So I think sometimes it's a really good marriage, provided it centrally points back to, is this kind of message and statement valuable to that end reader?
Yeah, it's the classic, outsider in, being able to look at something with a fresh pair of eyes, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't we, I think that's kind of covers off a little bit on like the approach that we're seeing, and not getting, I guess, not forgetting about that brand voice or some of those core tenets of your business or value proposition before you start creating a bunch of content. And maybe just to talk about that for a minute, like how many organizations have we seen that set up social media accounts or set up their posting strategy or their newsletter strategy or their various forms of digital communication across their website, even their blog, and it's all over the place, right? And they've put maybe junior resources involved, and hey, go do this because we should sort of be on these channels. And very quickly you're like, oh my, this isn't actually setting us up for success here. If anything, it could even be hurting us, right? Because of the nature of the posts and the content that's being put out there. So, I think that's kind of almost the danger in not having that straight path back up to the top that you said, Kev, is your teams that are working on this stuff just come out with stuff that's totally off base. And, we're not, talking about organizations like global brands like Coke that would have this stuff locked down, but your mid-sized business that's trying to have success online, they don't want it to be all over the place either. It's going to have an impact if it's all over the place.
Well, it's like a fragmented execution plan, right?
Sure.
And it's funny you say that. One thing I see in those big brands that you reference, they would have something like what I'm about to say is, a lot of time we get engaged and there really isn't a definition or some sort of one-page document about like mission statement, core values, absolute must-have statements in everything you do. And so if you're going to give it to an extended member on the team who isn't 15 years deep in their career and been doing this forever, he or she isn't thinking about, does this one tweet or this LinkedIn post or even this ad that I just had to get up by the end of the day, does it point back to those value props? So we're setting them up to fail, or at least not hit the message that really resonates. And so that's kind of like that fragmented thing of they're executing to the best of their ability, but they don't really have that guide or that path to connect it to something of bigger picture substance.
What's also interesting about having that path is that, sometimes we hear from clients, oh, it's a lot of work. We don't know what to do. So they just kind of do things they think that are just ad hoc, they're disconnected, thinking that's easier. But the reality is that's actually harder to do because you're asking someone to go ahead and create content without a framework. So it's having this blank piece of, digital paper, a blank screen in front of them saying, okay, we have to write something. And that's really hard. And then it very often misses the mark because it's not connected, as opposed to taking a little bit of time saying, I'm going to do this framework. I'm going to put together, some stories that align to the brand, to the audience, to the process. I'm going to identify some keywords that should always be part of the content or not. This is sort of a continuation of a story. So you spend some time doing that. So then if you do hand it off to somebody, there's a starting point. It's actually easier to write the content. I know that I find it easier when I have that. And then your content's actually going to be more valuable because it's connected back to a strategy.
I love that point. I even think it would be faster on top of the other points that you have, because
Definitely.
The way you described it originally is so right, because it's that individual is kind of starting from scratch every time they have to write something. It's a brand new exercise. And really it was sort of envisioned in the first place as being, yeah, look, let's just extend off this message and it should be pretty quick. But it wasn't because of that process not being there. You're totally right.
100%. All right. So now let's get into creation versus the activation component of it. So, I mean, let's just use an example of both of those. Like you've got, maybe if we can talk a bit about like a typical campaign that you would go activate that's going to have a bunch of stuff going on. You can't really do a good job. Like there's this conversation, so I take a step back for a sec, but the plumbing, we've touched on that. We touched on that a little bit before this. And I think on other podcasts where a lot of organizations are sort of fixated on getting the plumbing right, right? So that's the MQL to SQL and how do our leads come in through forms, and then what kind of drips are we going to put them through, and what are we going to warm them, and then we're going to get them off to sales. And I'm not saying they're devoid of a content conversation. You know, there's probably a download that drives the initial component, but there's certainly a huge emphasis on what's going on under the hood to get all that plumbing, that infrastructure working. And I would say that a lot of times we're brought in and we're looking at this messaging and we're looking at the landing pages and we're looking at the downloadable and like, okay, well, what's going on here? Like you can have this great machine underneath, but if it's not aligned to going back to that you know, that concept of the content itself, it's not going to perform well. In fact, in many ways, everybody kind of has a similar type of workflow now to a large degree, going from lead to revenue. It's almost like soon it'll be more about the content. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I also think a lot of organizations, it was touched on before, it might have been Robin, but sometimes they come from a place of they don't really know what should go where. And then there's a lot of overthinking that happens. Like, what does these 3 emails in this nurture look like? And my approach is let's take it right back down to simple. And this email should really have 1 or 2 core takeaways. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think once you break it down like that and you say, well, look, today's emails, I'm going to timestamp this podcast, but in 2021, they're usually like 200 to 300 words tops. There should be a lot of bullet points, maybe 2 paragraphs, each with 1 to 2 sentences. Really set the tone, and then have value prop bullet points to push back up into that tone, and then some kind of call to action, and you're done. Make it simple. People's attention spans, they don't want to read essays in an email, right? And so even then it's kind of overcomplicated. And so we bring it right back down to just basics. What's the one takeaway you want someone to get from this email? And then from there, that kind of defines a bit more of, okay, and now we know what the value props are. We know what the message has to be. And even then it's like, okay, well, I probably only need 2 or 3 sentences to actually get the message
Convey
across. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we talked about earlier this week was it's very difficult for an agency to sort of affect the value proposition of an organization, right? Mm-hmm. If they go out and they say, our product is great and it's got these features and it costs this amount of money, and then you kind of go out into the market and you're like, well, wait a second, like it turns out your competitors have more features, they've been around longer, and it's cheaper. You know, like it's hard to overcome that, right? So yeah. What we're trying to do is to sort of take that, whatever they believe is their value proposition and their way of being able to compete in the market, and really distilling that down across this campaign that you're now putting together into some creative pieces of content to sell that message, and do the very best that you can in you know, through that process. Is that fair?
Yeah. You know, I had an interesting conversation with one of our clients this week who does work with an agency, helps them on their content. And so the client's very much the brand voice. But, you know, a great piece of value that the agency was able to add in was being able to take the content and then being able to frame it up so it had, it included the neighborhood that they were moving to. So it was all about the client's brand, but then the agency said, well, I think this is a way, we're going to put this on social, and this is a great way to resonate it. And I thought that was just such a great way of working together, because you have the brand voice, the value proposition, and then thinking how to use the platforms and how to, sort of the global best practices of how to share content. And it was really great. And the client saw great value because they wouldn't have seen it that way. And then the agency wouldn't have been able to write the content in the same way the client did. So it's a great way of working together.
Just to add to that too, Robin, where we run into a lot of being able to sort of add to where a client is in their marketing strategy is sometimes you only need a couple of really good pieces to be able to sort of, and you spread those across sort of multiple channels. And that's something that a lot of folks that are just getting started in their marketing journey may not be aware of, that it's not going to take, 40 or 50 pieces of content to really get started and to properly populate a strategy. You can, a couple of good pieces with, those messages coming through loud and clear, and then working off of those messages is really all you need to really get started.
Yeah, it's almost like so maybe next we can talk about the stages of the journey that the various different types of content come into play. Because I do think there's a base layer. Probably all organizations, we would recommend a base layer or a foundational layer of content that's just supporting, that business value proposition along the way throughout the days and weeks. That isn't necessarily performance driven content that's going to, be out there to perform a job in the funnel. I mean, it's there, it's supporting, it's air cover. But I agree with you. It's almost like that half-life of the content. How much of this performance content do you really need, and how to the extent that you can really leverage one piece, even our videos, even our podcasts, right? There's a really good example how, this podcast will have 2 or 3 snips that'll get put together to be sponsored out on LinkedIn and on Twitter and on Facebook as a sub mini component, and then pointing back to the main podcast as an example that, you can really leverage this content in different ways. We don't do this, but we've talked about sort of spinning blogs off of our podcast, right? And just ideas like that, Chris, to your point, where we've had some of our performance content will last and still produce really good results after 3 or 4 months of doing the webinar, and you're pushing the replay. So we could talk a bit about maybe this concept of, the what content when in your journey, and then you're right sizing it so you're not having to feel like you've got to build like 5 to 10 webinars a quarter for you to drive the results you're looking for.
What is it that works too? Because the thing that's really changing now, and I don't know what the actual stats show, but I think, if you've got the option between looking at a 20 to 30 second video, or to, go to a blog page and read like a 2-page blog,
Sure.
Like more often than not, you're going to get more clicks on that little sideways triangle that it's like, and if you've got a really good, maybe a funny message in there, it's going to gather a little bit more steam than, again, maybe it also has to do, maybe somebody with more intent is going to read the blog, like maybe that's the case too. But certainly in terms of getting somebody interested in consuming some content, I think that video is obviously becoming a little bit more attractive and more sort of in line with where people are consuming content. Video is starting to really become that sort of thing that everybody wants as part of their content package.
Sure. I think video already is there. It's become the de facto medium people want to consume content in now. Like, I think people would be more willing to spend 2 minutes watching videos than a minute reading.
So
and just to throw in on that, Chris, before you go next, but I do think I like what you said, Chris, about maybe the intent, and that's sort of on this topic we're talking about right now, which is what stage in the journey. But I think it also informs the content strategy, which is also what we talked about earlier. If you said you're right, and if the video, the 30-second video or minute-long video is really talking about a problem that the product can solve or the service can solve, right? And it's in maybe creative way to get that message across. And what you said is, well, let's take that exact same thing and put it in blog format. Yeah, I think if you were to put those two out for competition, and we've done that, your videos will perform 10 times better all day long. But if you said, actually, the written piece is not about just telling you how we would solve that product or service. It's actually an example deep dive of how we did it and when we did it. And by the way, here's the formula and how you can calculate on how to do it too. Well, now you're right. You've put something where like they're already interested. They're enough to kind of come to our website, and what they're now reading about is really some in-depth example that's much further down.
Right.
Not to say that you couldn't use video to describe that further down example, but there's more. I could see more of a place for that style of written content, right?
Yeah. Well, Chris, you said it. It's the strategy behind the content. I love the strategy, but what Mike, sort of, you hinted at it too. It's sort of right sizing the content, not only like the message, how deep you go, possibly even the format, with where the prospect is in the buying journey, whether it's a top of funnel asset, a middle of funnel asset, or if you're in that bottom of the funnel, high consideration, that's when you throw in your technical guides or your really, really meaty blogs or articles or however you frame them, because then you've got the attention to make that worthwhile. But someone doing investigative research on top 10 CRMs they're considering investing in, that's probably not the right place for it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of explainer videos. I'm just thinking of some of the videos that I've seen out there because you're right. There's absolutely a movement to video. And it makes me think a little bit about, when the world suddenly decided that email was the communication channel. And the idea is, well, if I can email somebody, then that's it, I've got to win. Not thinking about, well, if you email somebody and it's, 6 paragraphs long, well, actually, no, that's not going to work. And video's kind of going in that same way as well. So having a really deep dive explainer video on your product, when you're just trying to drive awareness, well, you're missing the mark because someone's not going to spend all that time to see, the 25 steps to get to what they want to do. At that top of the funnel, they want to know probably more about your brand, probably about your people, and maybe one big problem that you solve. And then as you get deeper down, as Michael, you explaining, you're right, there's the blog option, there's the explainer videos. So it's not a one size fits all. And I think that's a really important thing with video. There's a strategy to it. And there are companies that are already realizing that, and they're being smart about their videos. They're not putting out the same video in exactly 10 different replications, because knowing that, no, that's it, we're going to lose people. And they're understanding their audience in the funnel. So,
on that though, Robin, I think that's a great point. You could theoretically create a video only strategy for content that appeals at different stages: top funnel, middle funnel, bottom of funnel. But I think the most sensible thing to do, there is no one single channel that covers all audiences and their particular needs and how they digest content or consume it. So I think what you would do instead is you look at each of these stages, you say, well, what's the right message that needs to be heard? What are the things that we really need to point to? Maybe also factoring in how much attention of the prospect do we have? We'll just have more later on than early on. And then you say, well, okay, if high level value props and meeting the company, Robin, to your point, is important at the top. Well, what would that look like in written format? What would that look like in video? And then say, I don't think that's a video thing at that stage because you have good rationale for it. Like, I think that would be the more important way to do it. And if you're doing it that way, it's like Chris said before, you're not creating all new content in 40 different assets. It's probably like 3 or 4 pieces of content, then divvy up, to reflect the actual medium it's going to be presented in. But I think that's a logical way to do it anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just thinking about, if we were talking about a short blog post, that might be, top 5 things you need to consider about X. Not realizing that actually that blog with those 5 bullet points, you've actually got 5 more blogs, because you can use each one of those bullet points, could be at a different funnel, could be for a different audience. Yeah. And it's just a great way to get your message out. Don't assume that everybody consumes everything right away, even a short piece of content. So lots of variations you can do.
It's complicated.
Yeah, and I think in terms of wrapping this one up, I also like the idea, and which we've talked a bit about this before, putting more focus on the content, like from a performance of our program perspective. So you could say, and when you're testing out your content and you're putting it out in the wild, you could say, well, you know, was the distribution or the activation of that, was that the problem, or was it the content itself or how we were communicating the content? And I think lots of times it's very easy for companies, for any marketer to get hung up, especially when the business is breathing down your neck looking for results, saying, well, maybe that didn't work. You know, maybe nobody cares about a digital workshop. You know, and we've tried, you know, that exact campaign, tried to put out a workshop, and the whole thing was thought through and we thought it was going to go well. And it really didn't. It really did not resonate. And so the question really around that is like, we knew our activation strategy was bulletproof. We had everything from our plumbing in place. It was really came down to that content strategy was not aligned to the market. And we're lucky as an agency to have a number of things, a number of irons in the fire from our marketing perspective, and just generally understand what goes into this for it to be successful, unlike prospective clients that could say, look at that and be like, well, nothing works. You know, if that didn't work, nothing works. And, you know, it'll be forever. And then the marketer's really on their heels trying to convince the business that, no, we can do this. We just need to continue to tweak our content strategy. But I think I was just going to sort of say measurement, right? Make sure you've got those measurements in place so that you can really understand the performance of your marketing. Because Chris, one of the things that you brought up earlier was what is working? What can you double down on? Yeah. There's no sense in building another piece of an asset if you can just double the budget into pushing it.
Yeah, that's true. Well, the other, and not to sort of stretch this out at all, but I am interested in like running a little mini survey here. And like one of the things that's been sort of like changing in the environment is this concept of gated content, right? Is it like yes, gated content or no? Kevin.
Are we going to do that right now?
We're going to do that right now. Kevin, gated, not gated.
It's a bit of both, right? Like, it's not an easy answer. Like I think we are moving towards not gated, but I think you have to be mindful. I don't think you gate case studies. I don't think you gate one-page PDFs. The only thing I think you have the right to gate now are events, whether they're one day in person or online, and really high quality thought leadership. Everything else is open. That's my answer.
Robin.
Robin. I'm going to agree with Kevin on that. I think that no, not because it's Kevin, because I think the more information that you can give to a prospect, it only benefits the company and it benefits the prospect. You make it easier to learn about your company, your product, and your services. The only thing that I would add to that is make sure that you are tracking and measuring all of that, because if you are going to give all that content away for free, make sure you know who is consuming it.
Yeah, I think that's a reflection though. Like that's a reflection of marketing in general, understanding the buying journey starts so much earlier than we recognize. It's like that whole Forrester Gartner stat of by the time they reach out, they being the prospect, they've done 60% of the legwork of their needs analysis. So I think it's sort of, let's not make this harder than it has to be for the lead. Let's give them all of the information they have to get us on the short list, so to speak. And then we've got the right later through high quality content, whatever, good events, to then go ask for the sort of indicator of interest. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, that's great. I was just going to agree with you there. I think I would say I'm not for gating content. I think for the most part, I'm of the mind of just hand it out for free, and not just hand it out for free, pay to deliver it for free, right? So get it on the networks and distribute it on your own dime, so it gets in front of people and really get your name and get those impressions, get those views, get those downloads up. And to your point, Robin, is make sure you're measuring that, because it's a much easier conversation to go and say, hey, we've had 10,000 video views and we've had 400 downloads of this asset. Now we don't know who these people are, and could be our competitors, but the point is they're probably not all of our competitors, and there's probably some really great prospects in there, but at least we know the impact that it's making.
The pros outweigh the cons there for sure, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think your point around what can you ask for, the only one I was going to add is probably the obvious one that we're in a lot, which is demos, right? The ability to say, yeah, like you want to do a demo, let's show you our product or service. Service maybe a little bit, not quite a demo, but you know what I mean. That's for sure something that you would ask for, and do otherwise just give as much of it away for free as you can.
But I think on the
Cool.
demo, really quick, you would say, like, you'd make it worth the while. So we're going to have some form fields that you got to fill out, but maybe it's something where we say, tell us your top need or thing you want to see most of, so we can then tailor the demo. Like if we can try to communicate a way that we're going to make this worth your while, there's a bit more sort of reason for the prospect to say, okay, you know what, I will fill that out because there's something in it for me.
There's a unique
sure.
return in that they're getting something unique in return for providing that information. So it's about, again, it's a value proposition on both sides.
So to wrap up, do we butter up to the content writers of the world and say your job is really hard and we feel your pain? It's not an easy gig, that's for sure.
No, yeah, I think we do. I think they deserve a pat on the back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And keep at it.
It's especially hard to start the process of a new asset, right? It's always easy to look at it after and say, okay, now what are we missing? But
Sure.
the brave ones are the ones that started, and those are the content marketers we hold dear to our hearts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Content. All right. Copywriters and content developers. Big thumbs up from us at Goose.
All right. Sounds good. So thanks. That's great.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Peace
Bye.
out, everyone.
Peace out.